Welcome, welcome, welcome to a special edition of Caribbean Focus. Caribbean Focus is the community voice of the Caribbean at Medgar Evers College. The weekly radio program highlights Caribbean educational, cultural, and social affairs and airs on WNYE 91.5 FM. And we are streaming live on Facebook at Caribbean Focus CF. I am your host, Hermina Marcellin. It is with great anticipation and a true honor to welcome a culinary visionary whose work bridges culture, creativity, and community. Chef Nina Compton, welcome to
Thank you. Thank
Focus.
you for having me today.
You are so welcome. And then may I say Sakafet?
Zakafat, yeah.
May we begin by inviting you to share a glimpse into your upbringing in St. Lucia, especially the influence of your father, Sir
hmm
John Compton, St. Lucia's first prime minister, and the values that shaped your journey from first your home of
Yeah,
St. Lucia. Then, I would say your home as far as where you grew up, and then your homeland of St. Lucia, and finally into the culinary world.
of course. So growing up in St. Lucia, I think I wouldn't have had any other way. I think my upbringing on the island was the best childhood I could ask for. And as you know, St. Lucia is very small, and I was able to experience a beautiful childhood with my family. We're a very close family, my siblings and my parents, and we would do a lot of things as a family. And those were really instrumental in shaping, I think, who I am today. I think my parents raised me to be very humble, to respect people, and to really understand where you are from and be proud of that. And Saint Lucia is again a very small island, and I think that we should be very proud of what we have achieved in terms of people that have won awards and really showcased our island, people like Julian Alfred that's doing amazing work representing our island. So I think that is something we had started as a child, understanding where we're from and where we're going to be in the next couple of years. And I think my childhood was, again, we were very close. So I think for me, it was having meals together. My father would wake up every morning and go into the garden, and then he would bring limes or lemons and make juice for us every morning. So that was kind of, I never really saw my dad as the prime minister. I just saw him as my dad. And he never made it a big deal of, oh, I'm the prime minister. It was always dad first. And farming was one of his very deep passions, and we would go down to the country with him on the weekends as children, going into the river and playing in the river and trying to catch crayfish under the stones, or just frolicking, having a very simple life, but really being with my family was really, really important. And that kept everything very close for us. So family occasions, birthdays, even Sunday, having breakfast together as a family, that was a very big part of our core values, was being together and supporting and respecting each other and celebrating things together. And I think that's how it made me realize that food brings people together, especially my family. And as I got old, I wanted to share that with other people besides my family. And that's why I wanted to become a chef.
Speaking of being proud and coming from a proud family, Sir John Compton became the first Prime Minister of St. Lucia on February 22nd, 1979. And that was actually the very day we gained our independence from Britain. This transition from colonial rule
hmm
to self governance is paramount in
Yes.
placing a firm hold on reclaiming our identity. How did you shape an identity rooted in this very fabric of resilience, of pride that you mentioned, and
Yeah.
cultural richness.
Well, I think my father at a very young age, he was really one with the people. And I think that he was able to connect with people on all different levels. And his passion for farming and really developing that industry, my father's vision was always to make sure that the people of St. Lucia were always independent and they could make a living that was able to, further their children's education. So you saw a lot of farmers um, becoming it became a very lucrative industry back then. And you saw farmers becoming independent owners of their land and making a profit and furthering their children to go to school overseas, and also have a pride in what we do. And I think that, as we transition out of agriculture, we are now going into tourism, and I think we've kind of lost that independence as people, where we are not really focusing on the farming as much. And I think I would really like to see us get back to that independence as people that have ownership of their land, and really focusing on that, because I think tourism and agriculture can live harmoniously. And I think that we need to get back to basically our roots of farming and showcasing this beautiful product that we can produce, whether it's cocoa, whether it's coffee, whether it's bananas. But that was something my father always tried to instill in people, is that we have this land, this is your land, and you can do a lot with it.
I'm just going to just segue just a little. You mentioned that you would love to see, St. Lucians, and going back into farming, and there is this coexistence between tourism and farming. Would you delve into a political arena at this point?
No, I would not. I would not. I would like to, I think for me, I'm looking at the next chapter of my life and what that looks like. And I think that it is really about getting back on island and really, you know, honing my skills in an arena where people can be advised on what we have and how we can maximize this. I think that, as I said, we can coexist with tourism and agriculture. I think having a culinary program on the island or hospitality school that would show people how to use rum more creatively, to use ingredients that we have locally, not importing products as much as we could, but really doing more of the farm to table projects we have on island. I think that we have a lot to offer, and like I said, tourism and agriculture can be showcased, and I think that we can do a lot more on the island. I would like to lend myself to that, because I think that people just need to be advised or guided into what we're capable of.
I want to stay a little longer with our prior question on identity. Derek Walcott, St. Lucia's poet laureate, Nobel
Yes.
laureate, and playwright, devoted his life's work to exploring the Caribbean cultural experience. And he gave a definite explanation of this. He calls it the penalty of colonial rule. Let's take a listen to a short, a snippet of this interview.
One critic, writing in the New York Times, has said of Walcott's work, "Despite his superb command of English, he has never felt quite at home in it. The paradox of a colonial identity is that it both liberates and oppresses, offering freedom from a dominating tradition, yet robbing the poet of any natural claim on the language."
Well, I think the difference lay not in a longing to see elms and oaks, really. The point was the alleged embarrassment, supposed embarrassment the presumed disinheritance, the presumed inferiority of mangoes next to elms or palm trees next to eucalyptus or pines or something. That's a penalty that colonialism brings with it, that everything becomes less than its alleged, superior, its alleged original. And that's the sort of distinction I was trying to make in terms of not wishing that the climate were different, but beginning to realize, and it's a very simple answer, it is simply that those things are named by the literature. Somebody in Warwickshire who says elm, right, says elm. But if Shakespeare says elm, then that's a noble tree. The difference simply is that there was no articulating of that vegetation. It was not sanctified by literature or hallowed by that experience. But the people of my generation who were beginning to write about it, who hesitated on the fringe of writing down the word breadfruit, on the fringe of writing down the word mango, didn't mean that the mango was not a beautiful tree. It was that the penalty of colonialism was the mango couldn't possibly have the dignity of an oak, in the same way that a black West Indian could not have possibly have the dignity of an Englishman in Warwickshire. That's the penalty of colonialism. For my mother.
Um, Chef Compton,
Yes.
connect. I am left to connect Walcott's command of reclaiming and celebrating our language with your new book, co-authored with Osei Endolin, Creole recipes, stories, and things from a St. Lucian chef's journey. And the cookbook, there's a forward that says, where else have you seen green figs and ground provisions listed so prominently in a book
Mhm.
of language you thought you understood? Why is linguistic reclaiming this linguistic tone? Why is it important to culinary tradition?
Well, I think, the whole process of doing this book, and the reason for doing the book is we need to document our culture. We don't have that many cookbooks on Caribbean cuisine or St. Lucian recipes. So that was really my driving force of documenting these things, because if you go to the bookstores, you see a lot of French cookbooks or, books on baking or something else. There isn't anything that's rooted in Caribbean recipes. And that was me documenting Caribbean recipes as I grew up and having this in written down, right? This is a document that I think is preserving our history. And it's also documenting the Creole culture throughout the Caribbean, and also in in some areas such as New Orleans, which is very deeply rooted in African French. So there's a lot of similarities I find between Saint Lucia and New Orleans, and that is something I wanted to highlight. I think going back to Derek Walcott's statement, it's a very powerful statement he's making about us reclaiming what is ours. It is us showcasing that we have a place at the table. Our food is worthy of being recognized, and we should be recognized for this. It shouldn't be treated as, my biggest argument when people talk about my restaurants, saying it's, oh, this is the first time they've seen a fine dining or a sit down restaurant, because people have seen Caribbean food as, roadside food. You stop and you get, grilled chicken, or you get a roti, or you go to Trinidad, you get a doubles, on the road. And I think that's what people perceive Caribbean food as, very casual and very simple. And I think that we can change the narrative and say that no, our food can be whatever we want it to be. And I think that we're finding a sense of pride in our cuisine. And I'm seeing more and more chefs of Caribbean heritage, especially in the States, cooking their food. People from Barbados, people from Jamaica, people from Antigua, opening restaurants in the United States, and saying that we have arrived. And I think that we, a lot of people are exposed to Caribbean food. They know of it, but I think that people don't understand the depth of our culture.
Speaking of depth and also looking at the duality of words as well, the first two words from the title
Hmm.
of the book, Creole, speaks to the enduring cultural hybridity between language and identity from my analytical standpoint. This is what I'm gathering. Could you share what inspired such a provocative title choice, and what does this title reclaim, and what does it reveal?
Yeah, so the title was it, there I could have said anything. It could have been, Nina's Caribbean table. It could have been anything I wanted it to be. But I wanted to say Creole, because, Creole is something that um, a lot of people in the Caribbean are familiar with. But when you come to New Orleans, Creole is something means something different. And I actually had a friend that he heard about he actually bought the book and he said, "Oh, this is Creole food." And then when he started to read it, he started to realize, "Oh, this is not a New Orleans Creole. Some of these recipes are not exactly the same Creole." And I wanted to showcase that the influences throughout the book are all linked through some kind of similarity through slavery. You start in St. Lucia, Jamaica, and then you end up in New Orleans. So you see a very heavily influence on African, what they left, the African influence is very strong throughout those things. And we talk about the similarities, but also the differences. And I think when people think of Creole, Creole is basically a melding of different cultures. And as we can see, St. Lucia has a melding of cultures as does New Orleans. So it was really about showcasing that and making people really pay attention to Creole culture um, as something that we should recognize and really listen to, because it is something that is right in front of our face and we should celebrate it every day.
Without revealing too much of the book's content, could you share with our viewing and listening audience the creative and historical journey you embarked on in bringing this work, this cookbook, to fruition?
Yeah, so that, I mean, the book is really, I wanted to make it beautiful, very brightly colored, because for me, I think when I think of the Caribbean, you look at the cover, I wanted something to be so bright that people just had to pick it up because they were intrigued by it. And I wanted to make sure captured pictures of St. Lucia that people understand, going to the market, seeing the fishermen, capturing the Creole cottages at Fondue Estate, the cocoa, just things that St. Lucia has such a rich culture. And I really wanted to showcase that throughout the book. And then, really show that cuisine, such as I talk about Haitian cuisine, which is again also a very rich culture and cuisine. I wanted to talk about that as well, and just understand how we should really appreciate our cuisine and our food in the best way possible through this book.
Chef Nina, you ended the book in New Orleans, and throughout our interview, you've touched on the subject of New Orleans. Why New Orleans?
So I get asked that a lot. People always ask me. I've lived here for 10 years. People always ask why New Orleans, and I always say why not. And New Orleans has an energy that is like no other city in America. It is its own place. It you can't compare it to anywhere else. People try and compare it to Charleston or Savannah. It's in a league of its own, and it's because of the people. The people really make New Orleans because the culture is so deep and rich, and they preserve it and they celebrate it every single day through the food, through the music. And for me as a chef, I was definitely drawn to that. I also felt very comfortable the first time I came to New Orleans because it felt like home. It really felt like the Caribbean to me. And I said, if I'm going to live in the States, I want to live somewhere that I feel comfortable and I feel connected to. And that's why I chose New Orleans.
Your first restaurant, Cope Lape, already begins to conjure up a story. Please share the story of how you came up with the name and the cultural influence that helped shape its cuisine.
So when I got asked to do my first restaurant, I had a moment of pause where they said, well, what is the food going to be? And I had never been asked that. I had always worked for other chefs, always executed their food, but I think I didn't realize in that moment that this is the moment I'm going to be opening my own restaurant. And I paused for a second. I said, it's going to be Caribbean cuisine. And they said, okay. And they nodded their head in agreement. And then I started thinking to myself, okay, what am I going to put on this menu? And I really wanted to showcase everything I could of food that I wanted to share with people. And I remember putting the curry goat on the menu. And my husband said, well, because curry goat that's my comfort food. I really enjoy it. And it's all throughout the Caribbean, you find curry goat. And he said, well, we can put it on the menu, but it may not sell. And we will give it a try. And it's the number one selling dish on the menu 10 years later. It's the most recognized dish that when people come, they know about this dish because they've read about it in numerous publications. So I started to get more and more creative, and the restaurant just turned 10 in June, and I'm looking at what does the next 10 years of this restaurant look like, and how do I want to showcase recipes or flavors that people are not familiar with, things that we only in the Caribbean may know. And I wanted to share that with people to understand all the different dishes. I just came back from Trinidad 2 weeks ago, and I was really diving into the Trinidadian culture and understanding their influences because they're very different from Saint Lucian, and I wanted to understand their flavors because I find the Caribbean is so unique and each island is so different. And I think when people think of Caribbean food, they always think of, jerk chicken, rice, and peas, and we are more than that. And I think that we're having a moment now where people are paying attention to us, and we have to bring our best foot forward and really showcase the best of the best, and that's what I want to do in the next chapter of my restaurant.
Thank you for this insightful response. And I'm taking the word right out of one of our viewers who has joined us live. Creole includes stunning travel photography and personal stories that traces your journey. As you mentioned, you're traveling the Caribbean from St. Lucia to culinary stardom. And I'm talking about being the finalist on Top Chef
Yes.
season 11. I was hooked. I was proud. What did you learn from this experience?
I think that experience for me was really instrumental in finding myself as a chef. I think I became the most creative, and the first dish I made on that show was curried turtle meatballs, right? And I said, I'm just gonna keep on cooking Caribbean food. And I just found myself being more creative and having more fun with it. And one of my driving forces is because I got asked a lot of questions. People saying, "Oh, where are you from?" And they say, "Oh, Saint Lucia, that's in the Virgin Islands." And I said, "No." So for me, that was kind of my motivation to tell people where I am from, where we are located in the Caribbean. So now people say, "Oh, I've been to Saint Lucia. Oh, I've read about it. Oh, I want to go there." And it's because I drove that very, very hard telling people where I was from and that we were not part of the Virgin Islands. So I really made people pay attention to that. And that was really my driving force on the show, was showcasing my island.
I want to ask, how did it shape now your path as a chef, as a storyteller?
Mhm.
Your book tells a story. It's a narrative. It's a journey. How did this also help in shaping you?
It was tremendous. I think that doing the show, I was able to find my culinary voice, if you will.
Yes.
And really, I think now as the restaurant is established, I am able to also mentor people, connect with more Caribbean chefs, do more events showcasing our heritage. We're actually doing one next month, for my dad's charity. My mom started this charity after my dad passed, to raise money for underprivileged children to help them get a further education. So he would have been 100 this year, and we are putting that back on the radar for people. So we're doing a event at the restaurant with three other chefs from Trinidad, Jamaica, and St. Vincent to raise money for the children of St. Lucia. So for me, it's yes, it's about cooking,
Yes.
and but it's more than that now. I have more of a responsibility to represent the Caribbean in any platform, and I want to make sure I do that respectfully, and also empower more people from the Caribbean to showcase their heritage as well.
And you're actually answering my next question on what is next on the agenda for you, Chef.
Well, the next is to again continue spreading the Caribbean cuisine gospel, but also I really want to you know venture back to working on projects in St. Lucia to again, if we're gonna make tourism our number one industry, we need to fine tune things. So I think giving some kind of course for people to go to do culinary classes, to understand cuisine, to showcase more local ingredients, and also do something with the beverage as well. I think training is something that can set us apart. And I always tell people, St. Lucia is beautiful, but we have more to sell than the Pitos and the Sulphur Springs. And I think that we need to make us a fuller package, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And I'm looking forward to visiting. When can I visit? I want to visit when you're there and for us to reconnect. I would love to visit New Orleans.
Yes, it is definitely somewhere. I tell people, this I mean, we have people from all over the Caribbean come, and the second that they come to New Orleans, they always said they're in love with it. I've never met a single person that said, "Oh, it's okay." Everybody is saying that it's beautiful. They love it, the people, the food, the energy. So I definitely invite people to come to New Orleans and come to the restaurant.
Thank you so much. Chef Nina, you are an inspiration. You are the embodiment of what Derek Walcott speaks of when he pleads to us to bring language and to make sure that we are using the language to reclaim our identity. I believe you're embodying this. Your book really reclaims that language and give this prominence to dishes that many would consider, roadside dishes, right? And
Right.
gives this class that it well deserves because it is part of our identity. I believe that you are doing that and you're doing it very well. You are invoking the linguistic reclamation, reclaiming, and I want to thank you. Thank you for your contribution in this effort.
Thank you so much.
I want to once again thank my viewing and listening audience for tuning in. It was a pleasure having you on. It was a great, great interview. And I look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Yes, same here.
Thank you so much, Chef Compton.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you to my viewing and listening audience for tuning in. This has been Caribbean Focus. Be well.